It started with a photograph that shouldn't have existed. The year was 1992, and the graduating class of Ridgeway High had just received their yearbooks. The glossy black covers reflected the fluorescent lights of the gym as students flipped through pages filled with smiles, handwritten signatures, and promises they'd never keep. For most, it was just another keepsake, a snapshot of youth before the inevitable pull of time. But for others, it became something else entirely. Something that whispered from between the pages. No one remembered who first noticed it. Some said it was a teacher. Others swore it was a janitor cleaning up after graduation. But when the page appeared, it changed everything. It wasn't bound with the others. It had no captions, no layout, no signatures. Just a single grainy photo of the senior hallway, empty except for one figure standing at the far end. Their face was turned away, their posture rigid, and beneath the image, printed in small, uneven type, were the words, "We never left." Most thought it was a prank, a dark joke by the photography club. But when the school tried to find the original negative, there wasn't one. The page hadn't been printed by the yearbook committee. It wasn't part of the final proof. And yet, somehow, every copy had it identical, flawless, unexplainable. That's when the stories began. The late-night calls from the print shop, the missing rolls of film, the empty classrooms that smelled faintly of developer fluid, and the quiet realization that something, or someone had found a way to make itself part of history. Decades later, when the school prepared to be torn down, an old box was found in the storage room beneath the auditorium. Inside were drafts of the yearbook, rolls of undeveloped film, and a sealed envelope marked with a single word, apology. That's when I realized the truth. The 1992 yearbook wasn't just a collection of memories. It was a confession. The door was never meant to be opened. The storage room beneath the Ridgeway Auditorium was never supposed to be unlocked. The janitor, an old man named Harris, had the only key, and he kept it on a ring so heavy it clinked like chains when he walked. No one questioned it. That's just how things were at Ridgeway High. Old rules that no one remembered the reasons for, only that they shouldn't be broken. But on a humid afternoon in June, 30 years after the class of '92 graduated, someone did. The demolition crew was behind schedule. The old gym was already a skeleton of steel and dust, the classrooms gutted, the walls stripped of the bright murals that once told stories of homecoming victories and drama club triumphs. Everything was ready to fall. But the foreman, a man named Lee, noticed a door behind a collapsed shelf in the basement hallway metal, unpainted and strangely new compared to everything else around it. The hinges had no rust. The padlock was industrial, as if someone had installed it recently, not decades ago. Lee didn't remember any mention of a sub-basement in the blueprints. He radioed the rest of the team, asking if anyone had already cleared that section. No one answered. Static filled the line, sharp and distorted. After a long pause, he grabbed his crowbar and forced the lock. The sound it made wasn't normal. It wasn't the clean snap of metal breaking. It was a dull, wet crack, like bone under pressure. The air that seeped out smelled wrong, sweet and metallic, like old film developer mixed with something else, something alive once but long since gone. Inside was darkness so thick it swallowed his flashlight beam. The walls were concrete, damp, covered with peeling paint that looked almost like skin. In the far corner, a box sat on a wooden table. Dust lay everywhere except there, as if the box had been moved recently. When Lee brushed it off, the faint outline of a faded label appeared. Ridgeway Yearbook Committee minus 1992. He called it in again, voice tight. No response. The radio only hissed. He opened the box. Inside were stacks of photographs, hundreds of them, some developed, some still curled strips of negatives. The developed ones all showed the same hallway, the senior wing, shot from different angles, always empty. Always the same time of day, judging by the light slanting through the high windows. Except in the last photo. In that one, a figure stood near the lockers, barely visible in the blur. But Lee noticed something else. The figure wasn't standing still. It was closer to the camera in every frame. He turned one of the photos over and found writing on the back, faint and shaky. "Don't let her out." A sound came from behind him. A slow scrape, like something being dragged across the floor. His flashlight flickered. The air grew colder, heavy with the smell of mildew and photochemicals. The scrape came again, louder this time, closer. He aimed the light toward the door. It wasn't closed anymore. Lee backed away, the beam shaking across the concrete. Something moved just beyond the light. Not fast, but deliberate, as if testing how far it could go before being seen. He shouted, but the sound seemed to vanish, eaten by the dark. Then, as quickly as it started, the light steadied. The doorway was empty again. Lee ran. He left the basement, the crowbar, even the box. Later, when the police came after he failed to show up at home, they found his helmet near the stairs. The light on it was still on, pointing directly at the door he'd opened. The door that wasn't supposed to exist. When they sealed the building the next day, no one mentioned it in the reports. The superintendent just said the area was unsafe. But the demolition was delayed again. And when they finally resumed 2 weeks later, the storage room was gone, filled in, sealed under new concrete overnight. No one ever found out who ordered it. Yet that wasn't the end. Because the week after the crew walked off the site, someone left a small brown envelope at the Ridgeway Historical Society. No return address. Inside was a photograph. The senior hallway, empty, except for one figure standing at the far end. The photograph wasn't supposed to move. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked between utility bills and alumni newsletters at the Ridgeway Historical Society. The receptionist, Margaret, almost threw it away. It was unmarked, creased, and damp at the edges, the kind of thing people sent when they wanted to stay forgotten. But something about the weight of it stopped her. Inside wasn't paper, not really something thicker, glossy, like old photographic stock. She slid it out, expecting to see a reunion picture or maybe another nostalgia submission from some proud parent. What she saw instead made her drop it onto the desk. It was a black and white photograph of Ridgeway's senior hallway taken decades ago. The image was faintly warped, as if a negative had been exposed to heat or moisture, but the composition was unmistakable. The long stretch of lockers, the exit sign flickering at the far end, the banner still reading, Class of '92, we made it. Margaret leaned closer. There, standing at the end of the hall, was a figure, human-shaped but slightly out of focus, like it hadn't been standing in the hallway when the picture was taken, but somehow between the layers of film and reality. She felt her stomach twist. She knew this picture. Everyone in Ridgeway did. It was the one from the mysterious yearbook page that no one had ever submitted. Her first thought was simple. Someone was playing a prank. The demolition of the old school had everyone talking again, bringing the ghost stories back. But when she picked up the photo to move it, she froze. The surface was cold, far colder than the air in the office, and there was a faint residue on her fingertips afterward, like the slick feel of old developer fluid. She wiped her hand on her skirt and called upstairs for Thomas, the curator. When Thomas arrived, he barely looked up from his coffee before saying, "It's probably one of those copies from the library archive." Nothing new. But when she handed it to him, his expression changed. His eyes narrowed, then widened slightly as he tilted the photo toward the light. "That's impossible," he whispered. "What?" Margaret asked. He turned the picture toward her. The figure at the end of the hallway, the same blurred silhouette, was no longer standing where it had been. It was closer now. Maybe 2 steps forward. Margaret shook her head, thinking she'd misremembered. But Thomas placed the photo flat on the desk, went to his filing cabinet, and pulled out a laminated reproduction of the original yearbook page. He laid them side by side. In the old print, the figure stood by the exit sign, faint and small. In the new one, it was halfway down the hallway, slightly clearer. It wasn't a trick of the light. The shadow's proportions had changed. The perspective matched perfectly. Someone or something had moved closer to the camera. Thomas locked the photo in a plastic sleeve, his voice low and tight. "We're calling the sheriff, now." By the time the police arrived, the office was silent. The only sound came from the hum of the old ceiling fan. The sheriff, an older man who'd graduated from Ridgway himself, sighed when he saw the photo. "Not this story again," he muttered. But as he reached out to take it, he paused. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glossy surface, but not where it should have been. For a second, his mirrored image stood behind the figure in the hallway, perfectly aligned, like he was part of the photograph. He snatched his hand back. Who else touched this? Margaret and Thomas exchanged nervous glances. No one spoke. The sheriff sealed the photo in an evidence bag and left with a promise to look into it. But that night, long after the office closed, the lights flickered in the archive room. The motion sensors triggered at exactly 11:32 p.m. The footage showed nothing unusual until the very last frame. For less than a second, before the camera glitched to static, a woman appeared at the end of the hall, pale, blurred, her hair falling across her face. Standing beside her was a metal door, slightly ajar. The same kind of door that had been sealed under concrete at Ridgway High. The next morning, the sheriff didn't show up for work. His cruiser was found parked near the demolished school grounds, engine still running, headlights pointed toward the empty lot where the gym used to be. On the passenger seat lay the evidence bag containing the photograph. Only this time, the hallway inside the picture was empty, and in the reflection of the glass, faint but visible if you looked close enough, was the sheriff's face. The negative was never developed. 2 days after the sheriff disappeared, the photograph was transferred to the county evidence archive. Protocol demanded it, but even sealed, even contained, it wouldn't stay quiet. The archivist, a man named Peterson, didn't believe in superstition. He'd cataloged all kinds of strange things, crime scene photos, burnt film reels, even audio tapes pulled from wreckage, but he always said, objects don't hold power. People give it to them. That was before he handled the Ridgway photo. When the evidence courier dropped it off, Peterson noticed something odd. The bag wasn't tagged properly. The submission slip was blank where the reporting officer's signature should be. He frowned, filled in the missing fields, and filed the envelope under unassigned. It was supposed to sit there, locked away, until someone from Ridgway PD claimed it. But that night, he stayed late to finish some reports. The archive was an underground room with concrete walls, metal shelves, and rows of fluorescent lights that hummed faintly when they flickered. He was the only one there after 9 p.m. He liked it that way, quiet, predictable. But when he went to lock up, he noticed something strange on his monitor. The feed from the east camera covering the photo evidence aisle had gone dark. Static pulsed across the screen in soft, rhythmic waves. He adjusted the dial. Nothing. Then faintly, for less than a second, he saw movement. A shape. Human. He froze. The door was locked. No one else had access. He switched the feed back to live view, and the aisle was empty again. The rows of shelves stood silent, boxes numbered and tagged. Everything normal except for one small thing. A photo sleeve lay in the middle of the floor. He approached cautiously, his shoes echoing on the concrete. The sleeve was still sealed, the evidence label visible under the plastic. The Ridgway yearbook photograph. But the image inside was wrong. The hallway was darker now. The light dimmed, as if taken at night, and there was no figure in sight. Just the corridor, endless and empty, stretching into a point that seemed deeper than it should. Peterson frowned, holding the photo up to the overhead light. The deeper he stared, the more the shadows moved, tiny distortions rippling at the edges like film reacting to heat. He turned it over. The back had handwriting, faint, identical to the note found by the demolition foreman weeks earlier. "Stop printing her." The words made no sense, but the fear behind them was tangible. His first instinct was to file a report, but something in him, something primal, hesitated. Instead, he took the evidence bag to the small dark room attached to the archive. It hadn't been used in years, but the equipment was still there, collecting dust. He thought maybe the photo had been tampered with. Maybe there was a second layer. He hung the photograph under the red light and studied it. The film stock was wrong for the 1990s newer, cleaner, almost modern. He reached for a loupe and pressed it to the glossy surface. The grain was sharp, unusually sharp, and beneath it was something he couldn't explain. Embedded under the image, faint as smoke, was another photograph. He could see it only when the light hit at a certain angle. A face, pale and expressionless, pressed against glass as if trapped beneath the top layer of film. The eyes were open, staring upward. The mouth was slightly parted, the lips distorted like someone screaming underwater. He stumbled back, knocking over the tray of fixer. The chemicals spread across the floor, hissing faintly as they touched the concrete. When he looked back, the photograph had changed again. The hallway was now completely dark. No exit signs, no lights. And at the bottom right corner, in tiny letters that hadn't been there before, was a date. June 5th, 1992. That was the night the Ridgeway Senior Prom had been canceled. No one ever said why. Peterson locked the photo back in its bag, shaking, and left the archive early. He called the county office to request the original negatives for analysis, but they told him something impossible. There were no negatives. The Ridgeway Yearbook Committee had gone digital in 1992, switching to a prototype photo system that used a direct exposure process, experimental technique abandoned after a fire destroyed their lab. The negatives never existed. That night, Peterson dreamed he was standing in a hallway, the same one from the photograph. His shoes echoed against tile. The air smelled like old chemicals and dust. And at the far end of the corridor, barely visible in the flickering light, someone was standing perfectly still, holding a camera. When he woke, his bedsheets smelled faintly of developer fluid, and on his nightstand was a single photograph. It was him standing in the archive room, under the flickering lights. The girl who wasn't in the yearbook. Peterson didn't go back to work the next day. He told his supervisor he was sick, but the truth was harder to admit even to himself. The photograph had followed him home, and he didn't know how. He burned the one from his nightstand, watched the edges curl and blacken, yet when the ashes cooled, the faint outline of the hallway was still there, etched into the residue like a ghost image on overexposed film. He vacuumed it up and dumped it down the drain, but the smell of developer never left his hands. That morning, he decided to drive to Ridgeway. The town was only 40 miles away, a quiet place that had been slowly dying since the school shut down. The last grocery store had closed years ago. Only the diner and the hardware shop remained, kept alive by nostalgia more than need. Peterson parked near the old square and walked to the public library, hoping to find someone who remembered the yearbook incident. The librarian, an older woman with silver hair pinned tight, looked up from her desk when he approached. "You're here about the class of '92, aren't you?" she said before he even spoke. He froze. "How did you—" "You're not the first," she interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Every few years, someone comes asking about that yearbook. Always starts the same way. A photograph, a letter, sometimes a dream. Peterson's throat went dry. You know about the missing page? The woman nodded slowly, then motioned for him to follow. She led him through a door marked staff only, and down a narrow hallway that smelled of paper and mold. At the end was a locked cabinet filled with archival boxes. She pulled one out labeled Ridgeway High, class of 1992, and set it on the table. Inside were microfilm reels, old faculty photos, and a binder labeled Yearbook Committee Records. She flipped it open, pages yellowed with age. The roster listed every member students, advisors, photographers. Peterson scanned the names until his eyes stopped on one that had been crossed out with red ink. Lydia Carson, photographer. "Who's that?" he asked. The librarian hesitated. "She never should have been there." Peterson frowned. "What do you mean?" "She wasn't in the official records," the woman said softly. "No transcripts, no enrollment, no photo ID. But she shows up in every club picture that year, always in the background, never smiling." When the yearbook was printed, no one could explain why she was in so many of the photos. The principal ordered the negatives destroyed, said it was a printing error. "But there were no negatives," Peterson murmured. The librarian nodded. "Exactly." He turned another page. Stapled inside was a faded newspaper clipping from 1993. The headline read, "Local Student Missing After Ridgeway Fire." The photo beneath was grainy, but there was no mistaking the pale face, the dark hair, the same distant expression. Lydia Carson. According to the article, she had vanished the night the yearbook lab caught fire June 5, 1992, the same date that appeared on the photograph in Peterson's archive. The article mentioned something else, a rumor that the fire started in the darkroom, where Lydia had been working alone on a new batch of exposures. Witnesses claimed she had been experimenting with a direct capture method that didn't require negatives. A teacher found her camera after the fire, melted to slag, the lens cracked like an eye that had seen too much. Her body was never found. Peterson felt a chill spread down his spine. Where did they keep the yearbooks? The librarian pointed upstairs. "Second floor, right wall. But don't open the sealed one." He frowned. "Sealed one?" "There was a copy returned years later," she said. "Someone mailed it anonymously. The package came with a note that said, 'Please keep it closed.' We thought it was a prank, but when a volunteer tried to open it, the lights went out. All the photos in that section of the archive came out black afterward. Completely black." Peterson climbed the stairs, heart pounding. The archive room smelled of old glue and fading ink. On the right wall sat rows of yearbooks, their spines faded from sunlight. Near the end, one stood outwrapped in brown paper, tied with thin wire, the words "Do not open" scrawled across the front in red marker. He reached out, hesitated, then untwisted the wire. The paper crinkled as he peeled it away, revealing the embossed black cover. Ridgeway High, 1992. The air grew colder. The fluorescent lights above flickered once. He opened it. The pages were normal at first students, clubs, faculty. Then he reached the final section. There, inserted between two glossy spreads, was the page, the one everyone had talked about. The senior hallway, empty, the figure at the far end. But something was different now. The image was sharper, clearer. The figure was a girl, head tilted slightly, hair falling over one eye. She was holding something in her hands, a camera. Peterson's fingers trembled as he turned the page. The next spread was blank, except for one line printed at the center. "I wasn't in the yearbook because I was the one taking it." Then the smell hit him, sweet, chemical burning. The lights flickered again, longer this time. The edges of the page began to darken, curling inward as if heat were rising from the paper itself. From behind him came the sound of a shutter clicking once, then again. He turned, heart hammering. No one was there. But when he looked back down, a new photograph lay across the open pages. It was him standing at the archive table, staring into the camera, his expression frozen in shock. And in the reflection behind him, a girl with dark hair was smiling. The shudder that never stopped. The click echoed inside Peterson's skull long after the sound had died. He stood frozen, staring at the photograph that hadn't been there moments ago. His reflection terrified. Mid-movement was perfectly framed in the center of the shot, the dim library lights stretching into sickly halos around him. Behind that reflection, barely visible, the girl's outline lingered like a shadow trapped in glass. He backed away slowly, heartbeat thundering against the silence. The camera sound came again, quieter this time, as if coming from inside the book rather than from the room. His eyes darted toward the door, but it had closed on its own. The knob rattled once, then stopped. He felt the temperature drop, each exhale visible in the air. "Who's there?" He whispered. No answer. Only the faint hum of electricity crawling through the flickering lights. Then, from somewhere deep in the shelves, came the unmistakable whir of a film camera winding forward. A mechanical sigh. Then the shutter clicked again. Peterson grabbed the yearbook and stumbled toward the exit. The knob turned freely this time, but when he stepped into the hallway, the library wasn't the same. The overhead bulbs glowed in unnatural amber, and every clock on the wall had stopped at 11:32. The air smelled faintly of smoke and burnt paper. He rushed down the stairs, calling for the librarian, but the front desk was empty. The computers hummed softly, their screens glowing with static. The clock behind the counter was frozen at the same time, 11:32. He reached the door, but when he looked through the glass, the world outside was gone. The square, the diner, the trees, it was all replaced by a gray fog rolling endlessly beyond the steps. He turned back, panic rising. The lights buzzed louder, brighter, until they all went out at once. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, in the dark, the sound began again. The mechanical wind of a film advance. The sharp snap of a shutter. Flash. For the briefest instant, light illuminated the room, and standing near the reading table was the girl, Lydia Carson. Her face was pale but flawless, preserved in the way old photographs flatten reality. Her eyes didn't blink. The camera hung around her neck, its lens cracked, leaking faint light from within. She raised it slowly. Flash. The world blinked white again. When Peterson opened his eyes, he was back in the archive room. But something was wrong. Everything around him was tinted in grayscale, drained of color like an undeveloped print. The hum of the air conditioner was gone. The dust hung suspended midair, frozen. The yearbook lay open on the table. He picked it up. The pages were no longer glossy. They felt soft, damp, unfinished. And every photograph inside had changed. The smiling students were gone, replaced by empty hallways, stairwells, and doorways. Only one figure appeared in each image, Lydia. In some, she stood in the background. In others, she faced the camera directly, eyes wide, expression unblinking. He turned another page and stopped breathing. The final spread showed the library itself, the same room he stood in now, captured from the corner near the ceiling. And there, at the center of the frame, was him holding the book, looking down at it, caught mid-motion. He dropped it, heart pounding. The photograph on the floor shimmered faintly. For a moment, the grayscale room rippled like liquid film, distorting the edges of reality. A voice came softly from behind him. "You shouldn't have looked." He spun around. Lydia stood at the doorway, hair draped over her shoulders, eyes reflecting the pale light from nowhere. Her camera dangled loosely in her hands. "What are you?" he managed to whisper. She tilted her head. "I was trying to finish it. The yearbook." But the pictures wouldn't stop. "What do you mean?" Her smile was almost human. Every time I took one, it added another page. The words chilled him deeper than the air ever could. He looked down at the yearbook again. The pages were still turning on their own. New photographs were developing in real time, each one darker than the last. The final one forming now showed the library door, slightly ajar, with a figure walking out into the fog. He looked back toward the entrance, but the door was gone. Only the gray haze remained, seeping inward through invisible cracks, coating everything in thin layers of ash. Lydia's camera clicked one last time. The flash wasn't light this time, it was darkness, complete and absolute. When Peterson woke, he was lying on the floor of his apartment. The yearbook sat open on his kitchen table, perfectly dry, perfectly intact. The photograph on the last page showed an empty library, the same one he'd visited the night before. Only one thing had changed. At the bottom corner, beneath the empty desks and chairs, was a small plaque on the wall. The text was clear and sharp. In memory of William Peterson, archivist, 1972 to 2024. The camera that still worked. The next morning, the sun never really rose. It just bled faintly through the clouds, a dull gray that made everything outside look like a photograph left too long in the developer tray. Peterson didn't remember falling asleep, but when he opened his eyes, the apartment was bright with that same colorless light, soft and lifeless. The yearbook still sat on the table where he'd left it. He wanted to believe it was a dream, some hallucinatory echo of exhaustion and chemicals. But when he touched the cover, the cold ran through his fingers again. That same unnatural chill. He pushed the book away and noticed something else. On the floor, beside the table, lay a camera. Old, heavy, black body with silver edges. A Canon AE-1, the same model used by Ridgway's Yearbook Club in the early 90s. He hadn't owned one, hadn't even seen one in years. Yet there it was, sitting in a small puddle of light, as if waiting for him. He picked it up carefully. The weight felt real, too real. The lens was cracked, spiderweb lines spreading across the glass like frost. The film advance lever clicked when he touched it, smooth, mechanical. There was a roll still loaded inside. He hesitated. Every instinct told him to throw it away, to smash it, to destroy anything that might still be connected to the Ridgway yearbook. But curiosity, the same quiet force that had driven him into the library, whispered otherwise. He took a deep breath and wound the lever. The familiar click snapped through the apartment. The sound was followed by another, an echo, faint but distinct. The same click, repeating itself from somewhere else in the room. He turned sharply, scanning the corners, but nothing moved. The air felt heavy again, pressing against his chest. He lifted the camera to his eye and looked through the viewfinder. The living room appeared normal, framed in the dim light. But near the far wall, where his reflection should have been in the glass cabinet, something flickered. A figure, motionless, watching. He lowered the camera. The wall was empty. He raised it again. The figure was closer now. He felt his hands tremble, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. He pressed the shutter almost involuntarily. Flash. No light came, but the world blinked anyway. He blinked with it, and suddenly, the apartment felt smaller, the air colder. The hum of the refrigerator had stopped. The lights had dimmed to a sepia tone. And there, standing near the window, was the girl, Lydia, her head tilted, the same expressionless calm. The cracked camera hung from her neck, identical to the one he held. Her lips moved, but the sound was muffled, distant, like a recording played underwater. "You took it," she said. Peterson stepped back. "What do you want from me?" Her eyes flickered to the camera in his hand. "Finish what I started." He shook his head. "No, you're dead. You burned in that fire." The faintest smile crossed her face. "Then why am I still developing?" The walls pulsed slightly, a faint shimmer of heat distorting the air. He dropped the camera, but it didn't hit the floor. It hung there, suspended, as if gravity had been replaced by something else, something slower, thicker. The shutter clicked again on its own. Flash. For a moment, he saw the Ridgeway hallway, overlaid against his apartment walls like a double exposure. The lockers, the exit sign, the long, empty corridor. Then it was gone. His phone buzzed suddenly, breaking the silence. Unknown number. He answered it with shaking hands. Hello? Static, then faintly, a voice. A woman's voice. You shouldn't have opened the book. Who is this? He demanded. A pause. Then the same voice, clearer this time, coming not from the phone, but from the camera lying motionless on the floor. Come back to Ridgeway. The line went dead. He stared at the camera. It was clicking again, repeatedly, though the film had long since jammed. Each sound came faster, like a heartbeat spiraling out of control. He stepped closer and saw faint flashes of light flickering inside the cracked lens. Images forming and vanishing too quickly to see faces. Hallways, something burning, something screaming. The air filled with the smell of smoke. Peterson stumbled toward the door, coughing, eyes watering. But when he grabbed the handle, his skin seared with cold. The metal was freezing. He looked down. The doorknob was covered in frost, crystallizing outward in delicate spirals that hissed softly as they spread. Behind him, the clicking stopped. He turned slowly. The camera was gone. Only the yearbook remained, open on the table, turned to a new page that hadn't existed before. It was a photograph of his apartment. Everything in the picture was exactly the same. The table, the window, even the yearbook itself, except for one detail. He wasn't in it. The call from Ridgeway. The silence after the clicking stopped felt heavier than any sound Peterson had ever heard. It pressed against his ears until his own heartbeat was the only thing left. The yearbook lay open before him, that new photograph gleaming faintly in the gray morning light his apartment, every detail captured with clinical precision, but devoid of him. The absence was louder than his presence ever could have been. He took a cautious step forward, half expecting the image to change again. But it stayed the same, fixed and waiting. The smell of chemicals lingered in the air, sharp, metallic, like fixer fluid mixed with ozone. He slammed the book shut and shoved it under the couch, then stood still, trying to slow his breathing. That was when the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. The display read Ridgeway Historical Society. Peterson's stomach turned. He let it ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, he picked it up, his voice hoarse. Hello? For a moment, there was only silence, faint static humming at the edges of the line. Then a voice, quiet and low, spoke his name. Mr. Peterson? It was a man's voice, older, nervous, unfamiliar. Who is this? My name's Deputy Harris, the man said. We found something of yours. Peterson's fingers tightened on the phone. What do you mean? Your name was written on an envelope left at the Ridgeway demolition site, the deputy continued. Inside was a camera, the same model used at the school in '92. We checked the serial number. It's registered under your name. Peterson's knees almost gave out. That's impossible. I think you'd better come see for yourself, Harris said, cutting him off. It's developing film on its own. Peterson drove to Ridgeway without packing, without thinking. The highway stretched endlessly through the fog, the landscape fading into gray fields and skeletal trees. Every few miles, the radio cut out completely, replaced by the faint hiss of static. Once, he thought he heard the sound of a camera shutter in between the interference. By the time he reached town, the streets were empty. The Historical Society stood at the corner of Main and Birch, its sign hanging crooked, half the letters missing. A police cruiser was parked out front, lights off. Deputy Harris stood on the steps, his hand buried in his jacket pocket like he didn't want to be there. "You Peterson?" he asked. Peterson nodded weakly. "Come inside," the deputy said. "You need to see this." The main office was dimly lit, the fluorescent tubes flickering intermittently. On the table in the center of the room sat the camera. The same Canon AE-1, its cracked lens glinting faintly. The air was thick with the smell of developing chemicals. A tray of photo paper sat beside it, though there was no enlarger, no red light, nothing that should have allowed images to form. And yet they were. Print after print slid slowly from the mouth of the camera, as though it were breathing them out. Each one was wet, fresh, and identical. The Ridgeway hallway. Empty. Always empty. Except this time, the door at the far end was wide open. Harris kept his distance, his face pale. "It started doing that an hour ago," he said quietly. "No one's touched it since." Peterson stared, transfixed. The longer he looked, the more he noticed each print was slightly different from the last. In the first, the hallway was clear. In the next, faint smoke curled along the ceiling. In the next, a shadow appeared in the doorway. By the 10th, the figure was visible female, long hair falling over her face, one hand clutching a camera. By the 20th, she was halfway down the hall. "This isn't possible," Peterson muttered. Harris swallowed hard. "Tell me something, Peterson. When was the last time you took a picture?" Peterson shook his head. "I didn't. The next photo slid out. He stopped breathing. It was a picture of the Historical Society office. The same room they stood in now. The same table. The same camera. And there, in the photo, were both of them, Peterson and Harris, standing exactly as they were at that moment. Then, before either of them could move, another photo began to emerge. Harris stepped forward, hesitating. "What's it showing now?" Peterson didn't answer. He already knew. When the print finished sliding free, the deputy stared at it in disbelief. It showed the same office again, but empty. The chairs overturned, papers scattered across the floor. The camera still sat on the table, smoking faintly. And on the far wall, written in dripping black letters, were 3 words. "Don't look back." Harris turned to Peterson, eyes wide. "What the hell is this?" But Peterson wasn't listening. His attention had shifted to the window. In the reflection of the glass, behind them, a figure stood at the door pale, silent, holding a camera. Flash. The light swallowed everything. When the deputy opened his eyes again, he was standing alone in the office. The prints on the table were gone. The camera was gone. And where Peterson had stood moments earlier, there was only a single photograph lying face down on the floor. He turned it over with shaking hands. It was a picture of the Ridgeway hallway. The figure at the far end was gone now. In her place stood William Peterson, the deputy who developed the wrong role. Deputy Harris didn't sleep that night. He sat in his cruiser parked outside the Ridgeway Historical Society long after sunset, the building silhouetted against a sky the color of ash. The photograph he'd found, Peterson standing alone in that impossible hallway, lay on the passenger seat beside him, wrapped in a handkerchief he'd taken from his pocket, though somehow the edges still felt damp. Every so often, he'd glance over at it, half expecting the image to move. He told himself he wasn't scared. He'd seen worse accidents, fires, bodies left half buried by time, but this was different. This didn't belong to the world he understood. It had the stillness of something waiting. At midnight, the radio crackled. It wasn't dispatch. Just static at first, then faint whispers like overlapping recordings of people talking underwater. He turned the volume down, but the voices didn't stop. They were coming from inside the car now, low and rhythmic, almost mechanical. Click, whir, click. He turned sharply toward the passenger seat. The photograph was gone. The handkerchief was still there, folded neatly, but the seat beside it was empty. Then he heard it again behind him this time, the faint sound of a shutter snapping. He twisted in his seat, flashlight in hand, but the back of the cruiser was empty. The beam swept over the glass divider, over the metal grate, over the faint reflection of his own face staring back at him. Except it wasn't just his reflection. Behind his shoulder, in the glass, was another face, pale, expressionless, female. He dropped the flashlight, scrambled out of the car, and slammed the door shut. His breath plumed in the cold air, each exhale sharp and shallow. The entire town felt abandoned, the streetlights humming faintly like insects trapped in amber. The Historical Society's windows glowed faintly from within, though he'd turned off the lights hours earlier. He stood there, trying to convince himself to leave, to drive back to the station, to forget this, to write it off as fatigue or nerves. But something inside him, the same stubborn instinct that had made him join the force in the first place, told him he couldn't. If Peterson had vanished, if the photos were real, then someone had to find the truth. He walked back into the building. The air was thick with the smell of developer fluid. The lights buzzed dimly overhead. On the main table where the camera had been sat a single envelope, yellowed and brittle. His name was written on it in thin, shaky handwriting. He tore it open. Inside were 3 undeveloped rolls of film and a short note. For whoever finds this, don't use the flash. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He'd processed film before. His father had run a small darkroom when he was a kid. It wasn't hard, just chemistry and patience. He could do it himself right here. Maybe whatever was on those rolls would explain what happened to Peterson. Maybe it would finally put this to rest. He took the film to the old archive darkroom, flicking on the red light overhead. The shadows lengthened across the walls like dripping paint. He mixed the chemicals by memory developer, stop bath, fixer. As the first roll unfurled into the tray, images began to appear slowly, like ghosts surfacing through fog. At first, they were simple. Photos of the Ridgeway hallways, the classrooms, the gym. All taken from angles he recognized from the old yearbook layouts. But as the sequence continued, the images changed. The light grew dimmer, the shadows longer. Then came a picture of the auditorium door, the one that had been sealed beneath the concrete years ago. In the next photo, the door was open, and in the next, something was coming out. He leaned closer. The figure was half-formed, distorted, its features smeared like wet paint, but the outline was unmistakably human. And hanging from its neck, catching the faint red light, was a camera. Harris's stomach turned. He dropped the photo back into the tray and stumbled backward, his boot catching on the cable running along the floor. The red light flickered violently, flashing between bright and dark, and in each blink of illumination, the photos on the wall shifted, some falling, some replaced entirely. When the light steadied again, every photo in the room had changed. They all showed him. In the first, he was standing at the table, developing film. In the second, he was turning toward the door. In the third, something stood behind him, out of focus. He turned slowly toward the doorway. The air was cold enough to bite. There she was, Lydia Carson. Her skin pale as paper, her hair damp as though she just stepped out of a darkroom sink. The same cracked camera hung from her neck. "You shouldn't have developed it," she whispered. The sound wasn't just in the air, it came from the photographs themselves. They rustled faintly, like breathing. The next click came not from her camera, but from behind him. He turned. The camera from the table was gone. Another flash erupted, flooding the room in blinding light. When Harris could see again, the darkroom was empty. The trays were dry. The film strips hung untouched. And on the wall, pinned perfectly straight, was a single photograph. It showed the Ridgeway hallway again. The door was closed this time. And at the bottom of the image, in fresh ink, a new caption had been written. Deputy Samuel Harris, 1968 to 2024. A film that wouldn't stop developing. When the new custodian unlocked the doors to the Ridgeway Historical Society the following morning, he found the place cold, silent, and smelling faintly of burnt chemicals. He assumed the cleaning crew had forgotten to air out the archive again. The power flickered when he hit the switch, and one of the ceiling bulbs popped with a flash that left a ghostly afterimage burning in his vision. He didn't notice the photographs at first. They were everywhere, hundreds of them, scattered across the floor, plastered against the walls, hanging from the ceiling vents like dead leaves. Some were wet, dripping a clear liquid that smelled like developer. Others were dry but curled at the edges, their surfaces cracked like old paint. Every single one showed the same hallway, Ridgeway's Senior Hall. He called the police immediately, thinking vandals had broken in, maybe art students pulling a prank. The responding officer, a young man named Carr, walked through the mess with his flashlight, snapping photos for evidence. But the deeper he went into the archive, the more uneasy he became. None of the photographs were duplicates. Each one was a frame in a sequence of film strip, printed one image at a time. And as the sequence continued, something in the hallway was moving closer. By the 50th print, the figure was visible. By the 100th, it was nearly full frame. The last photo was nothing but a blur of white and gray, like light bursting through a lens. Carr found Deputy Harris's badge on the floor beside the darkroom door. It was melted around the edges. The camera that had caused all this, the one everyone said was impossible, sat on the counter, still warm to the touch. The film inside hadn't finished winding. He radioed for backup, voice shaking slightly. But before the reply came, the camera whirred. Slowly, mechanically, the shutter clicked. The officer froze. The camera clicked again. The film inside rolled forward on its own, spooling out of the back like a tongue. Carr leaned in cautiously. The strip was already developing, the image bleeding into existence right before his eyes. The first frame showed the darkroom itself. The second showed him, bending over the table. The third showed something standing behind him. He turned around instantly. Nothing was there. But when he looked back at the strip, the next frame had already appeared. It showed the same scene, but now the figure behind him had raised a camera of its own. Carr dropped the film and backed toward the door, his hand fumbling for the light switch. The room plunged into complete darkness before he touched it. The clicking started again, faster now. The sound bounced off the tiled walls, coming from everywhere at once. He spun in circles, his flashlight beam slicing through the dark, catching glimmers of wet photographs plastered across the walls. Each one had changed. They no longer showed the hallway. They showed him. Hundreds of images, each one a fraction of a second apart. The flashlight shaking in his hand, his eyes wide, his mouth half open in silent terror. Flash, the beam exploded white. When the backup officers arrived 15 minutes later, the building was empty again. No sign of forced entry, no sign of Carr. Only his flashlight lay on the floor, its beam flickering weakly against a wall lined with photographs. The prints were dry now, each one perfect, sharp, and crisp. They showed the Ridgeway hallway, door wide open, light spilling through. At the far end stood Deputy Harris, and behind him, reaching out of the doorway, a hand rested on his shoulder. The officers sealed the building. The evidence was catalogued, boxed, and shipped to the county morgue for safekeeping. But that night, one of the morgue attendants stayed late to check the contents. Curiosity again, the kind that always starts with good intentions. He found the camera first. It was still loaded with film, but the roll was endless. No matter how much he pulled, It didn't stop. The images kept coming, one after another, each one darker than the last, each one showing the same place from slightly different angles. Then the lights flickered. He looked down. The roll had wrapped itself around his wrist. The emulsion felt cold, damp. He tried to pull it off, but the strip tightened like muscle. His skin burned. The film hissed faintly. Click. He froze. The camera on the table had turned itself. The lens faced him now. Click. His breath hitched. Click. When the morgue opened the next morning, the attendance station was empty. His clipboard lay on the counter, half covered in chemical residue. The evidence box was gone. Only one thing remained: a single developed photograph taped to the inside of the morgue door. It showed the archive room in Ridgeway, the same one everyone had seen 100 times. But this time, the hallway wasn't empty. It was filled lined wall to wall with photographs, each one showing a different person staring directly into the lens. And at the very center of the frame stood Lydia Carson. Her camera was gone. In its place, hanging around her neck, was a human eye. The eye in the photograph. No one could explain how the photograph ended up on the morgue door. The night staff claimed the security cameras had gone dark between 2:14 and 2:17 a.m. Exactly 3 minutes, the same length of time it takes to expose and fix a single print in a chemical bath. When the power came back, the evidence box was gone, and every bulb in the storage hallway had blown out. The following morning, the county transferred all Ridgeway-related materials to the state facility in Fairview, labeling them under closed archive. Contamination risk. The file sat untouched for 3 months until Dr. Raymond Hall, a forensic archivist, opened it. Hall had made a career of debunking strange cases like this. Cursed tapes, haunted negatives, myth turned into bureaucratic paperwork. He didn't believe in the supernatural. He believed in science. Light, silver halide, time. Everything left a chemical fingerprint. Everything could be measured. The envelope marked final evidence contained a single photograph, the same image found taped to the morgue door. He slid it out under a magnifying lamp. The print quality was remarkable. The paper stock was consistent with 1990s developer, but the exposure depth was unlike anything he'd seen. Dense shadows without loss of grain, light blooming as if captured on multiple layers of film. He adjusted the magnification, zooming in on the figure at the center, Lydia Carson. Her face was clearer now, preserved in perfect grayscale. The expression was wrong, not scared, not serene, but aware. Her eyes seemed to follow him, no matter how he angled the light. Around her neck hung what looked like a pendant, circular, glossy, almost wet. He increased the zoom until the image pixelated slightly, then froze. It wasn't jewelry. It was an eye. Human. Hall recoiled, his chair scraping across the floor. He leaned closer again, forcing himself to breathe steadily. The iris was distinct, the reflections in it sharp enough to show the faint outline of what had been in front of her when the picture was taken a hallway, lockers, and a faint human silhouette holding a camera. The reflection in the eye wasn't Lydia's. He checked the chemical markers, scanning the surface with his spectrometer. The reading spiked irregularly traces of organic material embedded in the emulsion. Not dust, not oil, something biological. He took a sterile swab and brushed it lightly across the print's surface. The cotton came away tinted pink. Blood, he thought, but fresh. He turned to the microscope, placing a small fragment of the residue on a slide. Under magnification, the cells were perfect human corneal tissue. He leaned back in disbelief, muttering to himself. Someone embedded it into the photo. It's physically impossible. Then the lamp flickered. The light dimmed, the air in the room thickened. The photograph, still under the lens, began to warp. The edges of the paper curled upward, and faint lines appeared on the glossy surface like veins spreading outward from Lydia's face. He reached to remove it, but the paper was hot, almost pulsing. The veins continued to grow, threading across the entire image until they converged at the printed eye. The surface split open with a faint tear. Something looked back at him. A real eye, perfectly formed, glossy and alive, blinked once from within the photograph. A thin tear of chemical fluid leaked down the print, sizzling where it touched the desk. Hall stumbled backward, his heart hammering. He could still see the reflection in that eye, the hallway, the lockers, and now, unmistakably, his own face staring back. He lunged for the containment cabinet, grabbed a fireproof sleeve, and slammed the photo inside, sealing it shut. But even through the thick glass, he could see the faint movement of the image. The eye continued to blink slowly, rhythmically, syncing with his pulse. He left the lab that night without locking the door. The camera above the workstation recorded 3 hours of footage before the lights went out. In that footage, the sealed photograph never moved until 2:17 a.m. At that moment, the glass case cracked from the inside. The light in the containment chamber flared white, and when it faded, the sleeve was empty. The photograph lay on the floor, curled inward like burned film. In the final frame of the recording, Dr. Hall's reflection appeared faintly in the observation window. Except it wasn't a reflection. He was inside the photograph now, frozen mid-motion, his face pressed against the image's surface, his eyes wide and glassy, staring outward as if begging to be seen. The case file was closed the next day. But a week later, a janitor cleaning the Fairview facility found something on his mop, tiny flakes of glossy paper that shimmered faintly in the light. When he looked closer, he saw that each flake contained the same image, an eye, perfectly detailed, staring back at him from every angle. The print that bled, the janitor's name, was Michael Reed, though everyone at the Fairview facility just called him Reed. He was the kind of man who noticed things but never talked about them. You could leave him alone in a room full of corpses or broken equipment, and he'd finish the job, mop the floor, lock up, and never say a word. But that night, something in the morgue storage wing made him stop mid-swipe. He had been cleaning the drain by the chemical disposal sink when his mop dragged up something that shouldn't have been. Their paper fragments, small and glossy, clinging to the wet bristles like dried petals. He bent down, squinting under the buzzing fluorescent light. Each piece was tiny, barely the size of a fingernail, but when he lifted one to his eyes, he saw it clearly. An eye, perfectly detailed, printed on the shard like it had been photographed from inches away. He frowned and looked closer. The iris was hazel, the pupil dilated slightly. He dropped it instantly. The fragment hit the floor with a soft pat, leaving a faint smear of red that spread outward like ink in water. He wiped it with the mop, but the stain only grew darker, thicker, until it looked less like dye and more like something alive. He glanced around the empty hallway. Probably a prank, he muttered to himself. Those damn lab techs again. But when he looked back down, the smear had changed. It wasn't random anymore. It had taken shape, lines converging into an outline. A hand, pale, stretched, fingers splayed as though pressed against the other side of glass. Reed stumbled backward, the mop clattering to the ground. The lights flickered once, twice. Then something moved behind him. A faint drip, then another. He turned toward the sound. The ceiling vent above the chemical storage room was leaking. At least, that's what he thought at first. But when he stepped under it, a drop landed on his cheek-warm, sticky, metallic. Blood. He wiped it away, staring at the red smear on his palm. The vent dripped again, heavier this time. Then, with a low groan, the metal panel fell open. Photographs rained down. Hundreds of them, curling and twisting as they fell. They landed on the tiles like dead leaves, edges wet and glistening. The smell of chemicals filled the air developer, fixer, and beneath it, the sweet rot of decay. Each photo showed the same thing. The Ridgeway hallway, but darker now, the walls streaked with something that looked like dried blood. And in every frame, closer and clearer than before, was the girl Lydia Carson. Reed's voice trembled as he whispered, "What the hell is this?" A photograph near his foot bled openly, red seeping from its edges and pooling around the corners. Another photo twitched slightly, curling in on itself like something breathing. Then another. The floor was soon slick with it. He backed toward the door, fumbling for the handle, but his boots slipped on the film-coated floor. As he fell, his hand brushed one of the prints, and a searing pain shot through his skin. He looked down. The paper was stuck to him, melted against his palm like it was grafting itself there. Through the thin layer of emulsion, he could see something moving beneath the surface veins, pulsing faintly with light. The photo bled harder. The blood wasn't spreading randomly anymore. It was tracing words across the floor, curling into letters that shimmered in the dim light. "Develop her." The lights went out. Only the emergency exit signs glowed red. Reed crawled toward them, dragging his hand, the photo still fused to it. The blood smeared behind him, leaving long crimson streaks. He reached the door and yanked the handle nothing. It didn't move. Then came the sound. Click. Flash. He froze. The light had no source. It just existed, instantaneous, blinding, cold. For half a second, the entire hallway was illuminated in perfect clarity, like the moment before a photograph captures its subject. In that light, Reed saw them all. Figures standing in the hallway, shoulder to shoulder, stretching into the dark. Each one pale, featureless, and holding a camera. Their eyes reflected the red glow of the exit signs, like polished glass. Click. The light vanished again. He screamed, hammering at the door, but the next flash came before he could breathe. This time, they were closer. He could see their faces, or rather, the lack of them. Smooth, empty skin where eyes and mouths should have been. Click. Closer still. Click, until the final flash revealed the last figure only inches from his face. It had her eyes, Lydia's eyes. Then everything went black. When the morning shift arrived, they found the mop bucket overturned, the hallway flooded with red liquid that turned out to be nothing more than tinted water. No body, no photographs, no blood. Only a single print taped neatly to the storage room door. It showed the same hallway as always, but now there was someone new standing at the far end. A man in a janitor's uniform, his right hand pressed flat against the lens. And from the center of his palm, an eye stared outward, the girl in the negative. The photograph of the janitor spread quietly through the Fairview facility like a rumor. No one spoke about it in front of the director, but everyone had seen it. Someone printed a copy from the case file and left it pinned to the break room corkboard. By noon, it was gone. By evening, the security cameras caught a lab assistant standing in front of the darkroom door, whispering to herself, while staring at an empty spot on the wall where the picture had once been. When they questioned her the next day, she didn't remember being there. She only remembered dreaming of a girl who never blinked. 2 weeks later, a courier from the State Archive arrived to collect the Ridgeway materials. He signed the forms, packed everything into a single crate, and drove north toward the main preservation facility. It was supposed to be routine 3 hours on the highway, drop off the cargo, sign the chain of custody sheet. But somewhere along Route 9, the crate started to rattle. He pulled over on the side of the road, thinking something had come loose. When he lifted the lid, a gust of cold air rushed out like the inside of a freezer. The documents were fine, the camera still wrapped in evidence tape, but the photographs had fused together into one solid stack. The outermost print shimmered faintly in the light of his headlights. He leaned closer. It was too dark to make out at first, but the longer he stared, the more the shadows took shape. It was a face. A girl's face. Her eyes were open, but where her pupils should have been, there were two tiny holes, black and deep, like pinpricks through the paper. He reached out instinctively, touched one of the holes with his fingertip. The photo inhaled. A rush of cold air pulled at his skin. The paper crinkled sharply, folding inward, and the black holes widened. For a moment, he thought he saw something behind them. A hallway, lockers, a figure moving closer, and then everything went dark. When the police found the van 3 days later, it was parked neatly at the side of the road. The engine was cold. The windshield was covered in condensation, but inside, the seats were dry. The cargo crate sat open in the back, empty except for one thing: a single strip of photographic negative hanging from the rearview mirror. The image on it was faint, but visible. It showed the inside of the van, the driver's seat empty. In the side mirror reflection, however, a girl was sitting there, looking directly into the camera lens. The negative was transferred back to Fairview for analysis. That was when they called in Dr. Evelyn Marks. Marks was an imaging specialist, not a believer. She'd spent 20 years dissecting the way film absorbs light, how memory and matter sometimes blur when heat or radiation distorts silver halide crystals. To her, there was always a logical explanation, until she saw the negative. Under normal light, the film appeared fine high contrast, consistent exposure, no visible tampering. But under ultraviolet, something else appeared. Another image beneath the surface. A second layer that shouldn't exist. She magnified it and adjusted the contrast. The secondary image wasn't random. It was a face Lydia Carson again, but reversed, her features inverted, glowing faintly like phosphorescent bone. And behind Lydia, barely visible, was a hand pressing against the glass from the inside of the image. The fingers were distorted, stretched thin, as though reaching outward. Marks leaned closer, breath fogging the lens. She could swear the film moved. The shadows trembled slightly, the grain shifting like waves under light. Then the UV lamp flickered, and the film snapped taut on the reel, pulling itself tight. A whisper filled the room, soft, female, "Let me out." Mark stepped back so fast her chair tipped. The whisper came again, louder, clearer. "Let me out." She cut the power and grabbed her recorder. The tape hissed as she hit play. Nothing but static until the faint click of a camera shutter echoed through the speakers. Then a second voice, faint but distinct, whispered under it. "You already did." The air turned cold. Her computer monitor blinked to life, though she hadn't touched it. An image began rendering across the screen, pixel by pixel. The same hallway, the same impossible corridor from the Ridgeway Yearbook, but this one was different. It wasn't just a picture anymore. The perspective shifted slightly with each frame, the view moving forward, as if someone or something was walking. She watched helplessly as the invisible photographer approached the door at the far end. It was open. A faint figure stood inside the light. Lydia. Her eyes glowed faintly, as if lit from within. She raised the camera toward the screen. "Doctor," Marks whispered. "No." The display went white. When the lab staff found her the next morning, the room smelled of photochemicals. The UV lamp was shattered. Her recorder sat on the floor, still running, picking up only a rhythmic sound repeating over and over. Click, whir, click. On her desk, pinned under the reel of film, was a new photograph. It showed Dr. Evelyn Marks sitting at her computer, frozen mid-motion, looking directly into the lens. And behind her reflection in the monitor, another girl smiled faintly. The room that remembered. The Fairview Imaging Lab was sealed off 2 days after Dr. Marks's death. The official report listed electrical failure and chemical inhalation as the cause. No one mentioned the photograph. No one dared to. But everyone who had seen it, the techs, the investigators, the cleaning crew, couldn't forget it. They said it wasn't just a picture. It felt like the room itself had taken the photo, like the walls were watching. After the closure, the lab sat abandoned. The state archived its contents under the Ridgway case once again, locking everything behind reinforced glass. For a while, the building was silent. But buildings don't stay silent forever. They remember. It began subtly. Almost politely, one of the janitors reported hearing faint mechanical noises late at night, a sound of gears turning, a film reel spooling. The power to the imaging wing had been cut months earlier, yet the noises continued every night at exactly 2:17 a.m. Eventually, the night guard, a man named Don Keller, decided to investigate. He was a veteran, logical, grounded, the kind of man who laughed off ghost stories and urban legends. He carried a heavy flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and a keycard that still granted him access to the restricted floor. When the elevator doors opened, a rush of cold air greeted him. The hallway lights flickered as if waking from a long sleep. The corridor smelled faintly of burnt ozone and photo fixer. He walked past rooms filled with dust and silent machines until he reached Lab 3A, the place where Dr. Marks had died. The door was sealed with a strip of red evidence tape. Across the surface, faint handprints were visible under the dust, as if someone had pressed their palms there recently. He peeled back the tape. The room beyond was darker than it should have been. His flashlight beam cut through a haze of chemical vapor that glowed faintly in the air. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, tacked side by side, each one identical. The Ridgway hallway again. Same perspective, same impossible door at the end. But as Keller stepped closer, he realized the images weren't still. They were moving slowly, subtly, like the frames of a film caught between motion and pause. The fluorescent tubes above him hummed weakly. He lifted one of the photos from the wall. The paper felt damp. Beneath it was another, and another, layered so thick that the wall was no longer drywall, but a collage of memory. He turned one over. Scrawled on the back, in handwriting that looked half-burned into the paper, were 3 words. "The room remembers." He froze. Something clicked softly behind him. The flashlight beam swung toward the far end of the lab. The old and larger machine, the one Dr. Marks had used, was glowing faintly, its lens projecting a square of light onto the opposite wall. The bulb had burned out long ago, but there it was alive again. The image on the projection screen was the Ridgway hallway, only this time the perspective was different. The camera wasn't facing down the hall anymore. It was facing back, toward whoever had been taking the pictures. Keller took one step closer. The projected image flickered. In the frame, he saw a figure standing exactly where he was. Now same posture, same flashlight raised. Only the figure's eyes were wrong. White, glossy, reflective, like undeveloped film. He looked down at his own hands. The beam of his flashlight trembled across the walls, and wherever it touched, the photos began to ripple, each one shifting slightly, reacting to his movement. Then came the whisper, "Do you remember me?" He spun around. The voice had come from behind the enlarger. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice breaking slightly. No reply, only the sound of the film reel beginning to turn again, steady, mechanical, unstoppable. The light from the projector brightened, washing over the entire room. The photographs shimmered, their surfaces liquefying into mirrored glass. Keller's reflection multiplied 1,000 times over, each version of him frozen in a slightly different pose. And in every reflection, behind him, Lydia Carson stood closer. He dropped the flashlight and bolted for the door, but when he reached it, the handle was gone. The frame was smooth, unbroken, like the exit had been erased from reality. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of chemicals and something sweet, almost human. The film reel stopped spinning. Silence. Then a single photograph slid out of the enlarger tray, fresh and dripping. Keller forced himself to look. The image showed the lab, perfectly captured. Every photo on the wall, every detail exact. And in the center stood him, Doane Keller, looking down at the very same photograph he was holding. Except in the image, he wasn't alone. Lydia stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her camera hanging from her neck. Her face was calm, almost peaceful. The lights in the lab flickered again, once, twice. When they steadied, the walls were blank. Every photograph was gone. So was Keller. The next morning, the day guard found the room sealed again, this time with a fresh layer of red tape. Inside, on the center table, sat a single-framed photo, perfectly dry. It showed an empty room. But if you looked long enough, you could see faint outlines bleeding through the white walls' faces, eyes, and the ghostly shape of a girl with a camera, waiting for someone to remember her. The portrait room. They never reopened the Fairview imaging wing after Keller's disappearance. The locks were changed, the power cut, and the hallways bricked over from the inside. The state called it a containment precaution, though no one could explain what exactly they were containing. The reports stopped mentioning Ridgway by name. It became Project 1992, a term that meant nothing to most, but carried a quiet dread among those who had ever handled its files. 6 months later, the facility was sold to a private collector, an eccentric man named Harold Crane. He was a historian, or so he called himself, fascinated by lost archives, forgotten technologies, and haunted objects. When the state liquidated Fairview's contents, Crane bought everything connected to Ridgway: cameras, negatives, boxes of photos that no one dared to open. He moved it all to his private estate, a sprawling mansion outside Coldwater Creek. Locals called it the house that looks backward because of the way every window reflected the trees instead of showing what was inside. That was where the story should have ended. But Harold Crane couldn't resist the mystery. His assistants warned him. They told him the boxes were sealed for a reason. But Crane was a collector of stories, and Ridgway was the ultimate one, a myth caught on film. On the night of October 12th, he set up the equipment himself in what used to be his gallery room. He arranged the photographs in neat rows across the walls, lit candles for ambience, and powered on an old projector he'd salvaged from the Fairview lab. The room smelled faintly of mildew and age. When the film began to spin, it whispered like a restless machine exhaling. The first images were familiar. The Ridgway hallway, empty and endless. The faint hum of the projector filled the silence as each frame rolled by. Then, about halfway through, the light flickered. The film stuttered. The next frame wasn't the hallway. It was a room. His room. The projector's beam was showing the very walls around him, same furniture, same rows of photographs. He frowned, leaned closer. The reel spun again. The next frame showed the same room, but the camera angle had changed slightly, closer to where he was standing now. He turned slowly. Every photo on his walls had changed. The faces he'd hung portraits of strangers from decades past were gone. In their place were images of himself, captured from impossible angles. One showed him standing at the door. Another showed him adjusting the projector. Another showed him right now, frozen in mid-turn. He felt the hair rise on his arms. Who's there? A sound answered him, soft, rhythmic. The familiar whir of a camera winding. Click. The projector light flickered again, casting his shadow across the screen. Only it wasn't his shadow anymore. The silhouette was thinner, with long hair falling over its face. He staggered back, knocking over a stack of boxes. Negatives spilled across the floor, strips of translucent memory. He shone his flashlight over them. In each frame, the same girl appeared, Lydia Carson. Sometimes far, sometimes close, always holding her camera like it was part of her body. Then something impossible happened. The negatives began to move. Tiny motions, her head turning, her eyes blinking, her hand adjusting the focus. One by one, the frames came alive, flickering faintly like the images wanted to step out of their own time. Click. He froze. The sound had come from behind him, inside the room. The projector's light swelled, filling the space with a pale glow. On the wall before him, a new image appeared, not from the reel, not from any machine, but forming spontaneously in the beam itself. It showed him Harold Crane standing in the gallery, staring at the projection. And behind him, Lydia. Her face was clearer now than in any photohuman, but wrong. Her skin had a faint texture, like photographic paper stretched too thin. Her pupils were gray, cloudy, reflecting not light, but something else, memory, or the absence of it. She raised her camera. "Wait," Crane whispered. "What do you want?" She tilted her head. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the room like wind, moving through film reels. "You looked," she said. "Now you're seeing." Click. The flash didn't come from her camera. It came from everywhere. Every photo on the wall, every strip of film, every glossy surface erupted in light all at once. The noise was deafening, the sound of 1,000 shutters slamming closed at the same instant. When the housekeeper entered the gallery the next morning, the projector was still running. The reel had burned through. The light bulb melted. The room smelled like ozone and salt. On the far wall hung a single photograph, framed perfectly in the beam's center. It was a portrait. Harold Crane, frozen mid-expression, eyes wide, mouth slightly open as if calling out. Behind him, Lydia's reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. The authorities sealed the estate. But neighbors claimed that on quiet nights, when fog rolled in from the creek, the house's windows still flickered faintly, with light like a projector running somewhere deep inside, showing a film that never ends. And if you looked closely enough at the glass, you could see them. Dozens of faces, all staring back, all perfectly framed. The last exposure. They didn't demolish the Coldwater estate. No one wanted to. The official explanation said the foundation was unstable, the wiring unsafe, the structure under review. But the truth was simpler. No one would stay in the house long enough to finish the inspection. Workers quit, inspectors vanished from shift logs, and the sheriff refused to file new reports after a deputy came back from the property shaking, unable to speak, with burns shaped like fingerprints on his neck. The mansion stood empty for years. Its windows reflected nothing but trees and clouds, though some swore they saw movement inside, light looming faintly, rhythmic, mechanical, like the pulse of a projector that didn't need electricity. Then, in the fall of 2024, an independent film student named Amy Keller, no relation to Doane Keller, bought the property for her thesis project. Her focus was analog hauntings, exploring how memory lingers in film and architecture. She wanted to shoot a documentary inside the Ridgway collection room, the so-called portrait room. The equipment was simple: a vintage 16mm camera, a portable generator, and a digital recorder. She arrived alone on October 3rd, just after sunset. Her notes from that night would later be recovered from a hard drive found near her car. The footage, however, was never recovered intact. The first entry in her log was calm, professional. The interior is colder than outside. Smells faintly like metal and old paper. No sign of animals. Setting up lights. The video showed her walking through dust and fallen plaster, her flashlight catching hundreds of frames hanging crooked on the walls. Each was blank. The emulsion on every photograph had peeled away, leaving white silhouettes where images had once been. She joked to the camera that the ghosts must have moved out. At 11:46 p.m., she started the generator and loaded her 16mm reel. Her voice grew quieter, slower. The temperature just dropped again. The walls are sweating? No, it's condensation. The air feels damp. She focused her camera on a single remaining photograph above the fireplace. It was the portrait of Harold Crane, the collector, frozen mid-expression. But now, there was something new in the image. The reflection in the glass was gone, replaced by a smear of gray that seemed to spread each time she looked away. In the next clip, she turned the camera on herself. Her breath fogged in the air. The projector just started. I didn't touch it. The sound of a reel spinning filled the background, steady, rhythmic. She swung the camera toward it. The machine was running without power, its beam throwing shaky light across the wall. For a moment, the lens caught an image, faint, grainy, moving like a live feed rather than old film. It was the Ridgeway hallway. Amy whispered, "This can't be real." The image flickered. In the projection, someone was walking down the hall, their shadow stretching toward the camera. Step by step, closer. Then came the sound. Click. The screen went white. The next segment of the recording picked up 20 minutes later. The camera lay on the floor, tilted sideways. The projector was still running, the beam hitting the opposite wall. The light pulsed faintly, syncing with the soft whir of the film reel. Then, from behind the camera, Amy's voice. It's her. She's in the film. Lydia, she's in the negative. Every frame, she's closer. When I look away, the reel changes. She's moving between the pictures. A pause, shaky breathing. If anyone finds this, don't shoot on film. Don't take pictures. She's not trapped in them anymore. They're just doors. The generator sputtered and went silent. The recording ended with one final frame, the image overexposed, almost pure white, except for a single dark shape in the center. A girl. Her face distorted, her eyes like two empty apertures. When investigators entered the house days later, the generator was out of fuel. The projector was cold. The camera sat on the floor, film still threaded inside. The footage they recovered was damaged, the last section warped by heat. But when the technicians restored it frame by frame, they noticed something that made one of them faint. In the final second of film, just before the reel burned out, Amy was standing in the middle of the Ridgeway hallway, looking straight into the camera, her expression calm, resigned. And behind her, holding a camera of her own, Lydia pressed the shutter. The image froze mid-flash. That was the last exposure. No one has entered the estate since. The building stands sealed, its windows covered, its locks rusted shut. But every October, on nights when fog covers Coldwater Creek, passers-by report seeing a faint, stuttering light flicker through the cracks. A projector's rhythm, a shutter's heartbeat. And sometimes, if you get close enough to the walls, you can see faint shapes forming beneath the paint faces, eyes, frozen mid-expression, waiting for the next flash. Because film never forgets. And neither does she.